Hello there. I wanted to add a couple more questions that I didn't realize that I had missed getting to, and I certainly want to answer each of the questions that people asked. So another question I asked that was asked was, this student loves learning about American battle history and battle, and knows that there were 34 Allied nations involved in the first Gulf War, and he's asking if I got to meet any foreign soldiers during my time, and if I did anything memorable. During the Gulf War, yeah, there were soldiers from a lot of different countries there. I met some Syrian soldiers under some very peculiar circumstances that I would say was very memorable but very negative. I think the Syrian soldiers did not view us as allies in the same way that we viewed them as allies. We had to move through a piece of ground that they had temporarily occupied, and it was rather awkward. But I will tell you that we worked side by side with some Egyptian soldiers who were very professional and very good soldiers. And then later in my career, I worked very closely with Australian soldiers, British soldiers, British SAS soldiers, and Australian special forces units, New Zealand soldiers from New Zealand, and soldiers from Canada. So I worked with soldiers from all those countries, and it was an honor always to work with them. I remember when you asked for an example or anything memorable. When I got to Afghanistan for my first tour in 2001, after getting on the ground, the first day there, one of the first soldiers I met on the ground in Afghanistan was a British SAS soldier. And I was surprised. I did not even know that the British were there yet. This was still early in the war. And I said something to the effect of, "I'm surprised to see you guys here." And his response was, in a very thick, obviously British accent, he said, "You called, we came, mate. We call, you come, mate." And I remember we used to see each other periodically from that point forward. He was in charge of an SAS team, and I was in charge of a recon team, and we worked together on a couple of occasions, and we used to joke about that all the time. I'd always say to him, "You called, mate. I came." So, but that was kind of the attitude, especially between the Canadians, Americans, British, and New Zealand soldiers, and the Australians. A very close relationship. The other question that I failed to answer was there a different feeling after 9/11? And the answer, I think I answered that in one of the videos and talked about it a little bit. But yeah, it was a very positive feeling of what we were doing was right, and what we were doing, we were very excited. A lot of people took a lot more risks. It's pretty impressive. It's pretty interesting to see how soldiers' behavior is in fact motivated and changed by the, I'll say, political environment or the degree of support that we believe we have. Soldiers are willing to take more risk and do more, if you will, sometimes when they really believe in the mission. It may not be hard to believe, but that's not just when they believe in it, but when they believe the American people are behind it. And the converse of that is once that starts eroding, sometimes it gets hard to get soldiers to stay focused on the mission and take as much responsibility for achieving a mission as perhaps is needed at times. And that's really the role of an officer, frankly, and that's why you try not to get too close with your men, because there is your responsibility. You're charged with the responsibility of accomplishing a mission. That's your responsibility. That's the purpose of our soldiers. That's the purpose of us being there, of doing what we're doing. And so if you don't have that commitment on the mission, then you're really wavering, and you're putting some men in danger for no reason, right? If you're not there to commit to achieve a purpose. So anyway, and then the last question was, did the war on terror feel different than the Persian Gulf War? Part of that I think I just answered, and I think the other part is it was a very different war. You know, my experiences in the Battle of Talwalkana Ridge or the Battle of 73 Easting, when we were tanks facing tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles facing tanks and artillery and air support, high intensity, violent action that is very different than the hit and run tactics and the occasional skirmishes that you would get in. Now, there were some engagements that were more like battles, but even those battles, the Battle of Fallujah, for example, or a variety of them in the Sunni Triangle, especially in Iraq, some of the battles that have been documented in Afghanistan. Later on in the operations, especially, there were some larger battles. I was engaged in a battle called Operation Anaconda, the Battle of Takur Ghor. Certainly there were battles, but the enemy was usually equipped with RPGs and rifles and machine guns and Dishkas, heavy machine guns. And that's a very different experience. And the engagements typically were shorter, violent, but not nearly as violent as when you have combined arms of artillery and air support and tanks. So it's very different, very, very different feel. And I think I also talked a little bit already about the difference of the emotion of it. And it was, a very, each engagement, each tour, each deployment was different. I think one of the things that stands out with me, and I'll end on this, was the people who you were fighting with, the Afghani people who were your allies, who gave their lives and who were committed to our success and their success. It always inspired me to see that this picture of us being the evil Americans, or whatever the anti-American message that often is portrayed, is not monolithic either. All Iraqis didn't hate us. Many Iraqis were working with us and wanted us to succeed, and were more committed, just as committed for sure, but probably more committed. They were taking more risk than we were. I mean, I wasn't risking my family. I was only risking me. So I think that's the part that often gets forgotten, that in each of these operations, there were other people who were critical parts and who were just equally committed to the same principles, and what we were fighting for, whether right or wrong, whether you agree with the decision or not, that's not, again, that's not my place to debate. What the principles for which we were fighting for in Kuwait, liberating a country; in Afghanistan, eradicating terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism that had taken over Afghanistan to the point where that country launched these attacks, or people who were leading that country were supportive of launched these horrible attacks against innocent civilians. Certainly these were noble and well-intended efforts. And then in Iraq, the same thing. We wanted to bring democracy and change to Iraq, and we wanted to eliminate the threat that they were creating and had created for 15 years. So good intentions. Again, we made our mistakes and we made our bed and we had to live with it. But nonetheless, those were some of the things that I take away from it. So again, that's probably a lot longer than you probably wanted to hear, but hopefully it was useful to you. And again, thank you very much and have a great day, and good luck in your studies.